Welcome you all to this debate titled Ukraine Rising, Perspectives of the European Revolution. On November the 21st of 2013, the Maidan Square in Kiev saw its first protests, aimed at the government's suspension of further European integration. The protests held on and escalated into riots and finally revolution. The Crimean crisis that followed and the controversial referendum have been a divisive issue in Ukraine and for the international community. Subsequently, other regions have seen pro-Russian insurgencies aimed at further autonomy within Ukraine or reintegration with Russia. Donetsk, Luhansk, Odessa and Kharkiv have seen particularly bloody violence. The revolution was not only televised, but live streams and social media have been an integral part of the conversation on Ukraine. As such, many have seen graphic images of the hard-fought battle over Ukraine's future. We feel strong sympathy for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters caught in the maelstrom. Ukraine is now on the serrated edge of Europe's future, and this battle, so hard fought, will reverberate throughout Europe. This evening is brought to you by AEGEE-Nijmegen. AEGEE is a European, multidisciplinary, apolitical student organization. We are dedicated to higher education, active citizenship, peace and stability, and cultural exchange. AEGEE-Nijmegen organizes international events such as youth exchanges, city trips, some universities, and hitchhiking competitions. Locally, we organize formal and informal activities such as plays, workshops, conferences, dinners, and parties. Our program for tonight will be divided in three parts. First, Dr. Marc Jansen will give the keynote address. Then, our speakers from the Ukraine will give a brief speech with a short coffee break in between. After these speeches, we will have a discussion chaired by David van der Geld of the Student Debate Society Triview. The panel will consist of the previously mentioned speakers, as well as Mr. Stienen and Mr. Smirnov. Mr. Stienen is an AEGEE alumnus, election observer for the OSCE, and witness to the first protest on the Maidan Square. Mr. Smirnov is a graduate of the St. Petersburg State University of Conflict Studies and is doing his master's at the CICAM Institute here at the Radboud University. We hope that the discussion will be frank, enlightening and civil. You are welcome and encouraged to participate. If you wish to do so, please line up at the microphone provided so that your comments can be heard. In the interest of time, please be brief and to the point, and of course, turn your phones off, please. The speeches will be recorded and placed online in due time, but in order to encourage an open debate and exchange of ideas, the debate will not be recorded. Wouter de Vries will be your host for this evening. I thank you for your attention. Now please welcome Ilona Chmoon, representative of AEGEE-Nijmegen.
Thank you very much. My name is Ilona Chmoon. I am the General Board Member of AEGEE, which is the umbrella organization for international students organizations in Nijmegen. And together with our members, we are organizing this AEGEE International Week in order to bring international affairs closer to all students and in order to promote the internationalization of our university. Now, before we get started tonight, this evening, I first have an announcement to make on the final activity of this week, which is tomorrow. Radboud International students will host the end of the AEGEE International Week party. Everyone is welcome. There are no entrance fees. It starts at 10:30 p.m. in Café Wunderbar, and you can check out our website eisen-online.nl for more information. That was it from Eisen's part. I now give the floor to AEGEE.
Thank you, Ilona, for introducing AEGEE and the International Week to us. I have the honor to introduce our keynote speaker of tonight, Dr. Marc Jansen, to you. Marc Jansen has been an assistant professor of East European Studies at the University of Amsterdam. He taught the courses in Russian, and East European Studies as a part of the East European Studies program. He has also been employed by the Dutch research organization NWO, the University of Utrecht, and the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. Dr. Jansen regularly appears in the media as an expert on Russian and former Soviet Union countries. He has lived and worked in Moscow for several years and traveled to other parts of Russia and the former Soviet Union. He has been an observer for the OSCE for several elections, including the Ukrainian elections in 1994 and 2007. He has published several books and articles on Russia and the former Soviet Union. His latest book is about the history of Ukraine. It is written in Dutch and called Grensland, de geschiedenis van Oekraïne. It will be for sale during the break and after the discussion. Please welcome our keynote speaker of tonight, Dr. Marc Jansen.
Moet ik het vasthouden? Ik doe deze zak. Prima. Ik geloof dat ik verstaanbaar ben. Oh yeah, I have to do it in English, that's right. I think I'm understandable. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been some time since I have standing in front of such a big audience, because I'm away from the university already for 2.5 years, but still active, as you know. And well, tonight I will give a lecture on the situation in Ukraine. There has been what has been called a referendum in East Ukraine last Sunday. Naturally, the supporters of independence got an overwhelming majority. 89.7% in Donetsk, even 96.2% in Lugansk. Did they indeed? Hardly so, I think. The separatists, as they are mentioned, control only part of Donetsk and Lugansk provinces. That is, a number of towns and not even completely. Even apart from that, the referendum was a sham. Indeed, there were large crowds in front of some polling stations, which is understandable by the fact that only relatively few of them were open. However, the vote was at gunpoint. Decent voters lists were absent, there were no observers, multiple voting was very much allowed, voting in secrecy was as good as impossible. I'm even not talking about the potential fraud at the count, or about the many thousands of bulletins found having been completed already before the vote. People voted for samostoятельность, an unclear notion somewhere in between independence and autonomy. Certainly, in this part of the country, people are very critical with regard to the government in Kiev. Let me just quote one of these voices. Beginning of the quote, "I haven't voted in the referendum, and nor have any of my friends. It's a referendum for idiots, organized by idiots. Of course, I don't want to be part of their absurd republic or join Russia. But having said that, I don't like the new Kiev government either. Basically, we're screwed." Actually, the Kiev government itself is in exactly the same position. It's being screwed. If it tries re-establishing order, that's impossible without making casualties, resulting in even more criticism. If it does not re-establish order, it loses control. The state is weak, the corrupt police is not under control, even super-rich Donetsk oligarch Rinat Akhmetov, the owner of football club Shakhtar Donetsk, does not intercede in defense of a united Ukraine. His role is murky, to say the least. The Russian President Vladimir Putin can just wait and see. Will it be enough reason for him to add the Donbass region to Russia? The leaders of the Donetsk and Lugansk, so-called People's Republics, have spoken out in favor of that. there might be another referendum that could lead there next Sunday, if it will take place indeed. And will it stop at that? Maybe, maybe not. We just don't know. Putin doesn't give us a look into his cards, if he himself knows what his next steps are going to be. Putin's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, called the referendum, I quote, an expression of the real mood among the citizens. For the time being, Russia is not giving in to the wish of joining the Russian Federation. It wants Kiev to negotiate with the separatists. The German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Steinmeier, agrees that Kiev should talk to the separatists in order to allow the presidential elections of May 25 to proceed. Today, the first round of this roundtable was planned. I don't know if the separatists participated or not. They themselves have said they wouldn't, and Kiev does not recognize them. German Prime Minister Angela Merkel, on the other hand, allows them to take part if they lay down their weapons. The Donetsk and Lugansk leaders have stated that their people's republics will not participate in the presidential elections of May 25 in any case. On the other hand, the governor of Donetsk province, Taruta, who has called the referendum an opinion poll, said that they would take place. But Russia has declared that it will also have doubts with respect of the legitimacy of the president elected on May 25, just like it has with respect to the present Kiev government. It all started about half a year ago. A power struggle was going on in Ukraine. Although it was an internal conflict, in an immediate way it concerned also two neighboring states or state unions. The Russian Federation, of course, and the European Union. Just to remind you, in November 2013, the Ukrainian government was generally expected to going to sign a so-called association agreement with the European Union. The Ukrainian government had already made up its mind in favor of the step, but it turned out to be against the wish of the Russian government. The latter started a trade war against Ukraine and in the end pressed the Ukrainian government to abandon the deal with the EU. Instead, a deal was made with Moscow, providing a $15 billion credit plus a discount of 1/3 of the gas bill. The price, of course, was Russian control. However, the Ukrainian people, or at least millions of them, then stepped in, starting large-scale demonstrations, first of all in central Kiev Independence Square, Maidan Nezalezhnosti, or shortly Maidan or Euromaidan. Not just that they wanted to join Europe, they no less objected to the kleptocratic regime ruling them. President Yanukovych's government tried to put them down, finally even resorting to large-scale violence. However, the operation, called Boomerang, literally backfired. In late February, Yanukovych escaped, resurfacing in Russia in the end. The more had done his duty, the more could go. Now it was Moscow's turn to feel offended. It maintained that a coup had taken place and power had been usurped by, in their words, the neo-Nazis backed by the West. They saw reason for that because nationalist groups like Svoboda, Ukrainian for freedom, and the rights sector had participated in Maidan, although as a minority. In their eyes, it gave them a license to attack and subsequently annex the Black Sea Crimean Peninsula, which, although inhabited for more than 50% by ethnic Russians, was part of Ukraine and was officially acknowledged as such by Russia. This was a gross violation of international law and was qualified in such a way by the international community. It did not make Russia change its mind, however, and it was feared that Moscow would not stop in Crimea and would continue its campaign of swallowing up or at least undermining Ukraine. The process has not stopped yet. Now let's dive back into the past and have a look if what has happened so far can be explained in any way by Ukrainian history. 2 months ago, my book on Ukraine's history, Grensland, meaning borderland in English, was published. The title is a simple translation of the word Ukraine and a very appropriate indication of the country's international situation. Ukraine has always been positioned in, to quote a recent book title, the shatter zone of empires. By the way, although Moscow claims that Ukraine is part of its sphere of influence, one could as easily come to a completely opposite conclusion. As a matter of fact, the first state on the territory of the East Slavs had Kiev as its capital. Late 9th century, 882 to be precise, until somewhere late 12th, early 13th century, Kiev was the capital of the state Kievska or Kievskaya Rus. A Moscow principality, or Moscow as a town, didn't even exist at the time. Then, however, Kiev was weakened by internal feuds among rival princes and the Mongol invasion of the first half of the 13th century. Power moved to new political centers, one of them being Moscow. In the 16th century, the Moscow princes, turned Tsars, devised a story that the crown of Kiev's Grand Dukes, the so-called Shapka Monomakha, or Monomach's cap, a gift from the Byzantine emperor, had ultimately ended up in Moscow, and that consequently they were the rightful heirs of Kiev's power and territory. They called it, anachronistically, Kiev Russia instead of Kiev Rus. The story has a very shaky foundation, however, if only because the so-called Monomach cap in actual fact was probably of Central Asian origin. After the Mongols, the Ukrainian territories were conquered first by the Lithuanians, and later they were added to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For a long time, the southern part was endangered by the heirs of the Mongols, the Tatars of the Crimea. As a result, these territories were called the Wild Fields. Tatars regularly made raids there and took many thousands of prisoners in order to sell them on the Black Sea slave markets. The Poles called the border territory Ukraina, or the Polish equivalent Kresy, both meaning borderlands. The peasants who lived there were known as Ruthenians and not yet as Ukrainians until the 19th century. Among them, Cossacks played an eminent role. Originally, they were a sort of anarchistic cowboys roaming over the steppes of the wild fields, but gradually they developed into something of a Ukrainian elite, and in the middle of the 17th century they turned against their Polish masters, and in 1654 their leader, or hetman, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, asked Moscow's Tsar for help. Ukrainians call it no more than an alliance, but in Russian eyes this Pereyaslav Treaty meant the unification of Ukraine with Russia. To summarize, Ukraine was divided between Russia and Poland. Late 18th century, Poland itself was divided and Western Ukraine became part of the Habsburg Empire. Ukraine was a multi-ethnic territory. The countryside was populated by the Ruthenian peasants. The nobility was Polonized or Russified, and the towns, or shtetls, were also inhabited by a large percentage of Jews who were not allowed to live outside this so-called Pale territory. In 1918, the Polish state was reinstituted, to be partitioned again as a consequence of the famous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939. Western Ukraine was reunified with the Russian or Soviet part of the country, together forming the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. During the Second World War, 1.5 million Jews were killed off and hundreds of thousands of Poles kicked out. When in 1991 the Soviet Union fell apart, this unified country, inhabited for almost 80% by Ukrainians, half of them Ukrainian-speaking, the other half Russian-speaking, gained independence. Crimea is a story apart. It was annexed from the Tatar vassals of the Ottoman Sultan in 1783. Many of the original inhabitants, the Crimean Tatars, were pestered out, and those remaining were deported in 1944 for alleged collaboration with the German enemy. They were replaced by Russian colonists, first of all. In 1954, the peninsula, until then part of the Russian Empire and subsequently the Russian Soviet Republic, was added to the Ukrainian Soviet Republic as a present in remembrance of the reunification of Ukraine with Russia in Pereyaslav 3 centuries before. Insignificant at the time, it turned into a Russian frustration after 1991. So, as you see, the Russian narrative contains some dubious elements. The continuity myth from Kiev Rus to the Moscow Principality, the Pereyaslav Treaty, Crimea or even New Russia, Novorossiya, the whole northern Black Sea coast as a Russian territory from times immemorial. Usually, myths have the function of covering power politics. And power politics have indeed been conducted by Moscow during the last few months. Although Europe and the West played some role, it was power politics or geopolitics, first of all, that induced Moscow to put pressure on Yanukovych and subsequently annex Crimea and undermine the rest of Ukraine. The Kiev government and the international community have condemned the Crimean annexation. As a matter of fact, Ukraine is an internationally acknowledged country with internationally guaranteed borders. Grabbing territory belonging to a neighbor country is not allowed. The opinion of the local population, even if we assume that the March referendum was free and fair, which many people doubt, is no sufficient argument. With respect to the eastern part of Ukraine, a very much contested region at the moment, there is much discontent in relation to Kiev and Ukrainians of the West indeed. The majority, however, see themselves as Ukrainians who want to keep their country united. The people occupying key buildings in a number of East Ukrainian towns, whoever they represent, Russia, the sacked President Yanukovych and his circle, are just themselves, do not represent the majority of the population, as far as we can figure out. To quote the blog of Ilya Ponomaryov, by the way, the only Russian parliament member who voted against the annexation of Crimea, I quote, "There is no large-scale Russian intervention, but there are special forces of the Russian main intelligence directorate, or GRU probably, and subversive groups that are carrying out the task of directing and organizing the forces of the so-called self-defense," end quote. Or a report from Mariupol on the Black Sea on the day before the referendum, I quote again, "Mariupol is left to the mercy of terrorists and criminals. Mayor and police escaped, troops withdrawn, houses, shops military units are being robbed, end quote. There is a word for a situation like this in Russian, bespredel, meaning chaos, anarchy, lawlessness. Think of the kidnapping of OSCE observers, journalists, local officials, citizens who are sometimes even killed. Yesterday, 6 or 7 Ukrainian soldiers were killed from an ambush, as they are considered occupiers now. The opponents of the Euromaidan movement have formed the so-called anti-Maidan movement, a mishmash of social protesters, supporters of federalism, and hardcore separatists, as well as Russian ultra-nationalists. Within this anti-Maidan movement, the separatists represent a minority. That is, they are a minority within a minority, but they quite determine its face. Although they call themselves anti-fascists, nevertheless there are racists and anti-Semites among them. With their heavy weapons, they have instigated clashes with often fatal results. This campaign has, at least partially, been organized by Russia. What is Russia's aim? They already took Crimea, and last week, on May 9, President Vladimir Putin was able, but irritant to Ukraine and the West, to celebrate Victory Day in Sevastopol on the Crimea, Russia's Black Sea Navy base there. Is he out at going further and grabbing more land in Ukraine, possibly even followed by other former Soviet lands? Or will he content himself with destabilizing Kiev's power in the country in order to not letting it develop into a strong Western-oriented state that could serve as an attractive East Slav alternative for Moscow-dominated Russia? We don't know yet. Just as a clue, one of the things Putin said in his speech in Sevastopol on Victory Day was this, and I quote again, "We ask other countries and nations to respect our legitimate interests, including the restoration of historical justice and the right to self-determination." End quote. He meant, of course, the right to self-determination of Russians and speakers of the Russian language abroad, outside Russia. His idea about the right to self-determination of non-Russians within the Russian Federation is quite different, as you may have noticed with respect to Chechnya and other North Caucasian regions. In December last year, Putin signed a law against the spreading of separatist views in Russia itself, punishable with 5 years in jail. And it is a right to self-determination with external assistance by those mysterious little green men and self-defense unities again, even if the majority of the population has a different opinion. This risky policy is called irredentism, the claiming of territory abroad with the argument that your co-nationals live there and want to return home. Heimensreich, they say in Germany, said in Germany. Like, for instance, apart from Ukraine, the many Russians living in North Kazakhstan, Belarus, Moldova, or the Baltic countries. Even more of them if you include Russian speakers. This policy has a notorious precedent, although most pro-Russian supporters rather like to ignore it. What is the big difference between Putin's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and Hitler's annexation of Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland in 1938? For that reason, one rather prominent Putin supporter had the brilliant idea of making a difference between the good and the bad Hitler, the one before, the other after 1939. I will quote the article by Andranik Mikhail in the Izvestia Daily of April the 3rd this year, translated into English. And I quote, "We should distinguish between Hitler before 1939 and Hitler after 1939, and separate chaff from grain. The fact is that until 1939, Hitler was gathering German lands and united Germany, Austria, the Sudetenland and Memel without a single drop of blood. If Hitler had stopped at that, he would be remembered in his country's history as a politician of the highest order. Is Putin following the German example and gathering Russian lands, which of course does not necessarily means the parallel can be further continued? For the rest, you'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jansen, for your excellent speech and shining your light on the historical and current affairs in the country of Ukraine. Our next speaker is from Ukraine itself. Her name is Ms. Nelia Golubiatnikova. Hope I'm pronouncing it right, I've been practicing all day. Nelia hails from the city of Lviv, and there she has witnessed the protests and the forthcoming chaos firsthand. She's traveled 24 hours to come here, so please give her a warm welcome, Ms. Nelia Golubiatnikova.
Good evening. I would like to tell you about my story of revolution. I live in Lviv. I didn't take part in any events, actions in Kiev, but we had some local problems, and I would like to tell you what actually we did, what we do, and what does it mean for us. So, Ukrainian Revolution, the Lviv story. Okay, everything started with student protests in November. I think Lviv is one of the first cities in Ukraine who started protesting against new politics of our government of Yanukovych. At this moment, people realized that they are not going to sign agreement with European Union, and of course, people were against these new politics. Maybe for students from Lviv, it was much more easier to go to the street and to express the negative reaction to what is happening in Kiev. What is doing Yanukovych, because the head of the university officially said that, guys, you can go, nobody is going to persecute you, but in the Kiev or in the eastern part of Ukraine, students were not so free to do that. And after that, people, not only students, realized that we're going to have a big problem, and some activists and parties organized people's meeting on the main square of Lviv, and they were discussing the current problem, what can we do actually at this moment, if we have any change, if we have any chance to change it. Some people decided, most of the people actually decided to go to Kiev. Those people who couldn't go to Kiev for some reasons, they stayed in Lviv and took part in so-called Euromaidan on the main square. Due maybe not on these pictures, but when you look at the pictures of Euromaidan, you can see different symbols of European Union, like a flag with the stars. So the first idea of Euromaidan was to express our idea about Ukrainian nation like a European nation, and that Ukraine has to be the part in the future, has to be part of the European Union. And later, of course, we changed the idea. It wasn't only about joining European Union, it was against corrupted and the criminal system that we have in Ukraine. The most important that we had great support from our local government in Lviv. On this picture you can see the mayor of the city who took part in all those actions that happened in the city center, and he made great influence on people, like inspiring them and helping them. And maybe he's not so typical Ukrainian mayor, because typical Ukrainian mayor has bodyguards, security, doesn't go to the public, like meet people. You cannot see them just on the street. But we have different mayor. You can meet him in a pub, drinking coffee, just like a normal guy. So on this picture you can see mayor and my friend protesting under rain. It was maybe one of the first days of the revolution. And this time Ukraine gets to the most of press, TV news, and you can see here also the symbols of European Union, and here. And those pictures were taken by one of the most famous photographers in Ukraine, and he's coming from Lviv. So actually, what did we do in Lviv? First of all, we blocked military bases in order they didn't had any chance to go to Kiev and to fight with people. So we used Facebook and some mobile applications to organize everything. We did a map, and we had the most important points that we had to block. Okay, there were military, that's a big territory with military bases, and there are points that they could go out. So people did something like that, what you see on the street. And they built barricades using snow, old furniture, and from the cars, the wheels. You can see it. And the people who lived close to this place, they were helping us. They were bringing food, tea, water, and all the possible help they could need. On this picture you can see an old man talking with military guys, trying to convince them not to go to Kiev, not to fight with people, not to kill anybody. But actually, most of those guys on that military base, they didn't want to go. And some of them even asked, please come and block, because we have order from Kiev to go, to leave the base. So we knew it, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there were people blocking that bases, that main points. Here you can see how it was organized. On this picture there is a kitchen, so people were cooking, storing some food. On this picture, an old man watching news on TV, what is happening in that moment. And this is the main entrance blocked, and behind this barricade there is a military car that is just going to leave this base, but you cannot see it because it's blocked. Well, all that blocking lasted maybe 1 month, during 1 month, till the end of February. 18th and 19th of February are very dark days in Ukrainian history, when around 100 people were killed. They were shot by police, by military service in Kiev. So we call it Heaven's 100. In this picture you can see the numbers of killed people and the region where they're coming from. So Lviv is here, Kiev is here. This is Crimea, and this is eastern part that we have problems in this moment. And you can imagine that most of the people who were killed, they are from western part. And of course people were desperate after all those clashes in Kiev. And on 19th of February we had Night of Anger, when people went on the street and destroyed some police departments, the main prosecutor office and security service office also. So they burned some documents, some parts of the department, and you can see it on the picture. All of that was happening in Lviv. This is the military base I showed you on the previous slide that was blocked with barricade. It was burned down during one night, and I think one or two persons died inside, unfortunately. So you can imagine that situation went out of control. The police escaped, the buildings actually were destroyed, and the weapon disappeared from the departments. So the situation wasn't so good for people. Everybody was afraid. Nobody knew what to do. So the most active people organized so-called self-defense with the help of city council and mayor. And this is like the map of the city, and it's divided to some districts, and it's contacts and the responsible person from every district who were patrolling the city, who are helping people in different juridical moments or medical moments. So they did everything that police had to do. What also we do, maybe it sounds strange for you, but we boycott different Russian brands. You can see such a flyer. It's written, "Don't sponsor occupation," and the list of brands that people suggest not to buy. So when we come to supermarket, first what we do, we check the code. If we see 46, we leave it. And here you can see some performance in the supermarket. Some guys, they were promoting this boycott. Also, some moments about self-organized army trainings. People are really afraid of what is happening. Nobody trusts police, nobody trusts army, and people understand that what we can do, it depends on us. So a lot of people are going to army trainings when they learn how to shoot, how to use weapons, and how to survive during the war. Ukrainian protests abroad. I don't know if you have something here in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, no?
Yes, yes, a couple of times.
Yeah. Okay, these pictures from protests in Rome, and this girl, she's from Lviv. She just moved to Rome, and she was one of the main activists. And some days ago, she even met our Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, and he came to them just to discuss how is it going to be. And this is the last picture, may be a little bit rude, but it's what actually we're trying to do. What is written? To put government's brains on the right place. And the national colors, blue and yellow. So the main problem for this moment, how to make government work for people, how to break the system, and how can we change it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nelia, for sharing with us your interesting story and giving us some insight in the way the protests were organized in Lviv. We will now have a short coffee break for 15 minutes until 8:10. Coffee and tea will be provided at the entrance. There you can also buy Dr. Jansen's book on the history of your brain. Thank you very much. See you after the break.